UN called a meeting on nuclear disarmament, but 5 of the biggest nuclear military powers say they will boycott the negotiations. Is it realistic to expect nuclear weapons to ever become a thing of the past? And it's been 6 years since the start of Syria's civil war with no end to this conflict in sight. What can be done for the country's children who survived the fighting and a treacherous sea journey to end up in refugee limbo on the Greek islands? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. On March the 27th, the United Nations launched a conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. A senior UN official said that creating a world free of such weapons is a common obligation of all states, both nuclear and non-nuclear states, and called for their inclusive engagement. However, US President Donald Trump's UN envoy publicly opposes the treaty and has called for a joint boycott of the treaty from its allies. What are the anticipated outcomes of this meeting, and why are there such divisive attitudes among different countries? To learn more about the meeting, I'm joined in the studio by Zhao Tong, the fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. But first, let's take a look at how the UN official sees the significance of the negotiations and also the attitudes of the American ambassador to the UN towards the negotiations.
The continued existence of nuclear weapons still poses yet another existential threat to humanity. The need for progress in nuclear disarmament has rarely been as urgent as it is today.
You are going to see almost 40 countries that are not in the General Assembly today. And that's 40 countries that are saying, in this day and time, we would love to have a ban on nuclear weapons. But in this day and time, we can't honestly say that we can protect our people by allowing the bad actors to have them, and those of us that are good trying to keep peace and safety not to have them.
Let's start our conversation. Mr. Zhao, thank you for joining us. Now, countries such as Brazil, South Africa, Mexico have been leading the efforts to launch the negotiations for a legally binding treaty to ban nuclear weapons. But as we've heard, there are countries who are staunchly against, and there are countries such as China who have voiced also its specific opinion. What are the different reasons behind these two camps? Could you explain to us briefly?
Well, in fact, all countries, including both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, are already committed to the ultimate goal of nuclear disarmament. In fact, the nuclear weapon states are legally bound by the NPT treaty to negotiate a treaty to disarm their nuclear weapons. The only difference,
non-proliferation treaty you're talking about.
The only difference between the two camps is what's the most effective approach to achieve this goal. For nuclear weapon states, they still believe that nuclear weapons play a critical role for their national security, and their allies depend on the nuclear umbrella for deterring nuclear and conventional threat from third countries. And therefore, they advocate an approach that is called incremental and step-by-step approach, which include efforts to gradually reduce nuclear arsenals, which includes the US-Russia bilateral nuclear reduction treaties. They want to put in place a treaty to ban nuclear weapons tests. They want to negotiate a treaty to prevent further production of fissile materials. They want to create more nuclear weapon-free zones in the world. However, on the other side, the non-nuclear weapon states, they believe that bureaucratic inertia is the fundamental reason for lack of progress in the non-nuclear weapon states, and therefore they want to impose moral and legal pressure and encourage the political leaders in nuclear weapon states to take fundamental measures to undermine the nuclear deterrence on which current nuclear weapon states depend on for their security. So they have very different visions for what's the best approach towards achieving nuclear disarmament.
Well, efforts by countries to start this bilateral negotiation towards nuclear disarmament have actually been going on for over 2 decades. However, little progress has been made in the past. What has stalled such efforts for so long, and what brought about the breakthrough that we saw last year, which led to the start of the negotiation this year?
Right. For many years, countries have tried to promote nuclear disarmament within the existing multilateral disarmament mechanism, such as the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. However, due to the Conference on Disarmament adopting the consensus rule, so any single country can prohibit any progress from taking place. So
everything has to be decided by consensus instead of a vote where you decide by majority.
Exactly. And also, so the patience among the non-nuclear weapon states is running out. Therefore, they have started the movement to call for international attention to the consequences, the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. So a number of countries, including Norway, Mexico, and Austria, they have convened international conferences promoting international attention to the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And that efforts lead to many countries to want to negotiate a UN treaty completely banning nuclear weapons. And even among the nuclear weapon states, there are major division among themselves. The US and Russia have the most sizable nuclear arsenals. And without them making further cut to their nuclear stockpiles, it's difficult for second-tier nuclear weapon states, including UK, France, and China, to have a multilateral negotiation on nuclear disarmament. And also Israel, which is a country that does not even admit its possession of nuclear weapons, it's difficult to incorporate Israel into the existing negotiations, and not to mention additional countries like India and Pakistan, who illegally tested their nuclear devices in 1998, and inviting them to existing negotiations would be seen as granting a recognition of their illegal nuclear status. So all these difficulties contributed to the lack of progress on nuclear disarmament.
Oh, I remember last August I was in Geneva covering a very important meeting where the UN working group on exactly what we're talking about, this task, put forward the vote, and eventually by a show of hands the resolution or the report was adopted by a small majority to be submitted to the UN General Assembly to start this negotiation. So a lot of division anyway there, even among the countries who were supporting this negotiation to be started. But what exactly will such a ban, a treaty, do for the world? And with the absence of nuclear countries, can it really be effective?
Well, it is impossible for them to negotiate a comprehensive nuclear weapons convention with verification measures and reinforced measures to make sure that nuclear weapons can be eliminated through a verifiable and irreversible manner. Without the participation of nuclear weapon states, that is very much unachievable. So it is very likely that the negotiating parties will seek to have a nuclear ban treaty that simply declares that nuclear weapons are illegal. And that could impose legal and moral restraint on existing nuclear weapon states.
Will that be instrumental to the eventual goal of achieving a weapons-free world then? Because we have for instance, the NPT, as you mentioned, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has been effective, right, to curb the spread of nuclear weapons. Now, if we have this international treaty, will it help things?
Well, it's the hope of many countries that this ban treaty could contribute to the ideal of building a world free of nuclear weapons, which is fully in line with the NPT treaty. However, there are also other concerns. For example, some people have raised the possibility that some non-nuclear weapon states, they can sign up to this new nuclear ban treaty. And believing that they have already demonstrated their commitment to nuclear disarmament, they can then withdraw from the existing NPT treaty. And that will pose danger to nuclear non-proliferation, because it's the NPT that has very strict verification measures, making sure countries cannot take advantage of their peaceful nuclear program and to develop a potential military nuclear capability. So that could, in fact, contribute to more virtual nuclear capabilities around the world.
The latest assessment from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute indicates that the US and Russia possess the largest number of nuclear arsenals. So with And there you can see the combined total number of nuclear warheads in possession of by these countries are way bigger than the combined total of any other countries that are currently believed to have nuclear weapons. So, Mr. Zhao, how do you see the absence of the US and Russia in the negotiation of this treaty in the effect of achieving a nuclear weapons-free world?
You're very right. Right now, US and Russia possess more than 90% of the international nuclear weapons stockpile. And without their efforts to promote nuclear disarmament, way to make concrete progress. But current political struggles between the two countries make them very difficult to push forward nuclear disarmament negotiations. They accuse each other of non-compliance with other nuclear arms control agreements, such as INF Treaty. And they also disagree whether they should include other related topics into nuclear negotiations, such as missile defense. And also with Mr. Trump in White House, he has made very conflicting voices about nuclear policy. On one day, he called for a world free of nuclear weapons. On the other day, he said, let's build and even expand American nuclear forces and let there be a nuclear arms race between US and Russia, and sending very confusing signals.
Encouraging other countries in Asia to have their nuclear weapons. But let's talk about China's position here. I'm sure a lot of people are very curious. Generations of Chinese leaders have stated that by developing nuclear weapons, China aims to have the minimum capacity to launch an effective nuclear counterattack. And for the ongoing UN meeting, here is what the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say.
经过慎重的
After careful study, China has recently decided not to attend the negotiation. The decision to maintain the current international arms control and disarmament region comes after close consideration. It also reflects China's responsible attitude towards maintaining strategic global balance and stability.
That was the spokesperson for China's foreign ministry. How do you interpret, can we understand China's pledge to have a responsible approach towards a nuclear-free world?
So basically, China has long called for a complete prohibition and total elimination of nuclear weapons. But China also believes that we have to take care of the practical security concerns of all countries. If nuclear weapons are immediately prohibited and even eliminated, countries will have to face the reality that they have very asymmetrical conventional military capabilities. And those countries that have inferior conventional power will fear that they will face a new military threat, and therefore they will invest more on their conventional military capabilities. So that could lead to a conventional arms race. And also, without the fear that conventional conflict could escalate to the nuclear level, countries might feel less restrained to initiate conventional war. Therefore, eliminating nuclear weapons could have negative consequences to the overall stability and security of the world. So China believes we have to take a prudent and step-by-step approach, taking care of the practical security concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao Tong from Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. And here is my point. A world without nuclear weapon is the common aspiration of all countries in the world, but it cannot happen overnight. And it has to take the joint consultation between countries which possess nuclear weapons and those who do not. However, at this time, the lack of vision and the lack of clear guidance from countries like the United States is sending a very mixed signal, and that is not helpful. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. This month marks 2 anniversaries. It is now 6 years since the start of the war in Syria and 1 year since the EU struck a deal with Turkey over how to handle the refugees streaming into Europe. In response, the Save the Children organization has published 2 reports outlining the plight faced by children coming from that war-torn country who are now detained or stranded in the Greek islands waiting for the cases to be processed. The CEO of Save the children is the former Prime Minister of Denmark, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, who joined me earlier in the studio to tell me about the plight of these children. I began by asking her to outline the major findings of the reports.
It is natural for Save the Children to really ask, what does a refugee situation do for a child? We have been around for almost 100 years. We work in 120 countries, including China, and we were founded on trying to help refugee children. So right now what we're seeing is refugee children coming from Syria, and of course we are asking, have they got what they need, these children? They need shelter, they need food, but they also need education, and they need someone who looks at their mental health, because these are children that have seen something that children should never see. So we have children in the Greek islands that are in detention. We have children in Turkey, and what is common for all these children is that they have seen things that children should never experience, and they're suffering from deep mental trauma, and for the first time ever. And Save the Children have conveyed this survey where we can actually see and prove and hear the stories from these children, and the mental trauma they're suffering is enormous.
First of all, tell us a bit about the children that are trapped in Syria in this report that's called Invisible Wounds.
Yeah.
What are the problems? What is the most urgent problem they're faced with?
I mean, we call it invisible wounds because these are the wounds you can't see, but perhaps the wounds that takes the longest to heal and can be most damaging for the children and also the country they have to build up in some years if we don't heal them. And what we're basically seeing for these children is that many of them, they can't sleep at nights, they're wetting their beds, they have general trauma, they don't know who to turn to, they think of committing suicide. Some of them are rendered speechless, they can't actually speak anymore. These are the kind of trauma that these children are suffering. Put on top of that, we have the lack of education, and I ask the world, how are these children going to go back to Syria ever to try to build that country up again if they're so damaged? This is not a few children, these are many children that have suffered.
I was going to ask you, how widespread is the situation? I mean, you interviewed hundreds of children and families. How do you estimate the number of children affected?
I don't think anyone can, but we have done the biggest survey of Syrian children that I think anyone has ever done, because we are interested not only in what children need here and now, it's food and shelter, but also asking ourselves and getting the global community to ask itself, how are these children going to live in the years that are coming, and how are they going to build up their countries? And it is quite telling when we hear about children who want to use drugs because they don't know how to face reality. They want to commit suicide. Some of them also succeed in committing suicide because they can't face life on this earth anymore.
Yeah, there's a second report that's about particularly the refugee children that are trapped on Greek islands, on these 5 Greek islands, as the EU and Turkey are coming back and forth about how to resettle them. It seems that the process has taken extraordinarily long, and that report is called A Tide of Self-Harm and Depression. What is special about these children that you found?
It's basically the same trauma these children are suffering. I went to Greece some time back and I met some of these children, and I'm not protesting that European countries have the right to protect their borders and do what they have to do, but one thing we should keep in mind, and that is everywhere in the world, that children should not be kept in detention. Children are children, and they're in detention, and we might not call it detention, but these children, and I have spoken to them, they know that every day a door is locked from the outside and they can't get out. So it feels like they are in prison. And I spoke to them and they feel depressed. They don't know what the future brings. I am impressed with these children because every day they come out and they wake up, they go to the child-friendly spaces that we are creating, Save the Children, to learn, to feel that they can be children again. So there is something we can do for these children, but they are not being treated the way children should be treated because they should not be in detention in Greek. In the Greek islands.
But what are the biggest difficulties the local people are facing in trying to help these children? Is it lack of funds? Is it lack of will? Or is it language barrier?
It's a mixture of both, all of those things. I don't think it's so much a lack of will, because there's a tremendous hospitality in the Greek islands as well, and I'm not actually blaming the Greek government. But of course it's a lack of funding, but there's also a general lack of cooperation within the European countries. The European countries, which have done so much together and created the European Union, and are so amazing actually at cooperating, they have not cooperated very well when it comes to the refugees. And that has actually meant that now we have refugee children, Syrian children, who have seen the worst you can see in this world. They are blocked in camps in Greece. Some of them are in detention where they shouldn't be. They're seeing things they should never be seeing. So we're failing these children twice. First, there was a war in Syria that they had to flee, and they had to see physically the bombs falling, and then they come to Europe, and we're not helping them with an education and building a future for these children, harming them once again.
What are the other things that European countries can do together to help these children, you think, because you were saying you didn't want to criticize any particular government, but you think European
we have
governments
to
could do
uphold
better?
the standards that we have set for ourselves. We have standards in this world, luckily, that should be protecting children. We have the UN Charter for protecting refugees and a specific charter to help children. And it is very clear that we have said to each other and shaken hands on it that children should not be kept in detention. So I understand that European countries need to protect their borders. I was a Prime Minister myself. I know you have to protect their borders. But at the same time, we should keep our soft spot for the children and make sure that they are not in detention, because we're not only letting those children down, we are also letting our future down because they're not equipped to partake in that future.
Yeah, looking ahead, I'm afraid I haven't seen too many encouraging signs in the kind of relationship between the EU and Turkey in terms of how to resettle the refugees. For instance, just a couple of days ago, we're seeing this kind of war words between Turkey and EU. For Turkey's interior minister has threatened to blow the mind of Europe by sending 15,000 refugees a month to EU territory in an intensifying dispute with the bloc. How do you look at this kind of rhetoric, using refugees as kind of bargaining chip for political purpose?
Well, it goes to show that the EU-Turkey deal, it might have looked good when they did the deal, but now it is creating a situation where refugees are being used as a bargaining chip in a very unpleasant language between Turkish leaders, Turkish Erdogan, I should say, and European leaders. And that is not where we should be. I urge everyone to calm down, and I'm not doing that. I'm doing that mostly for the children and the refugees whose life are at stake here. We have to remember this is people we're talking about. People are just people, and particularly children. We have to help them, we have to protect them. So this kind of language that goes on between Turkey and European leaders right now, it is not helping these children.
Let's talk a bit about your mission here, this time in China. Why are you here? What are you busy with?
Well, first of all, I come back to China every so often. I was here as Prime Minister. I've been here as a tourist. This is a country that I really love and admire. So it's great to be back in China. But now I'm here as CEO for Save the Children. We are a very big organization. As I say, we work in 120 countries. We worked in China for almost 30 years. And what we're basically trying to do is to assist the Chinese government, and we have very good cooperation with the Chinese government, in the Chinese government's endeavor to bring children out of poverty and to give more rights to children and basically protect children. And wherever we can be of assistance, we are there. We work in 12 provinces across the country. We work in the most poor and rural areas of this country, and right now we are doing as different projects as helping disabled children be part of the normal school system and get a chance. We also know there's a lot of children who are left alone because their parents are working in town, and we're also helping the Ministry of Justice help them to think about how can we create a judicial system for youth that is different from the adult judicial system. So these are the different things we do here, working with the Chinese government. I think we know how to do that, just be of assistance to an effort which has been amazing over the last many years on this part of the Chinese people and the Chinese government.
How big of a challenge do you think China is facing in all of the things in protecting the rights of children in this regard? And how has it been your experience in working with the Chinese government in addressing these?
Well, I would say, I don't hesitate to say that it was the hard effort of the Chinese people and the Chinese government that brought the world into a situation where we could say that we had achieved the Millennium Development Goals. If it hadn't been for the effort of China of bringing millions, hundreds of millions of children out of poverty, we would not have reached that target of the Millennium Development Goals. Now, of course, the world has set new targets.
Yes.
And with the Chinese president being part of that and leading that effort, I heard the Chinese president speak in the World Economic Forum in Davos some months back, and he was very clear. China wants to be part of the world, China wants to engage, and China wants to take its responsibility for the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
And there is no doubt that if China does with the Sustainable Development Goals exactly the same as the Chinese government did with the Millennium Development Goals, we have a chance of actually reaching those goals. So that is what I'm hoping. That's what Save the Children is here to back and to support as much as we can. Even though we only take a little part of that, we are here to back that effort because it is so important that China keeps going and keeps bringing children out of poverty, bringing them in education and lowering and making sure that all children survive past their first 5 years. No child should die to prevent it.
The findings of the two reports on refugee children or children in war-torn Syria stayed in my mind. In any conflict situation, children are usually the most vulnerable, but they also can be very resilient, being able to adapt to the situation. But this is not a reason to do too little, hoping they will be able to adapt and get over the trauma by themselves. The world hears so many stories of children suffering that there comes a point when there is a numbness that sets in. Disaster fatigue, if you will, when even a picture of a dead child on a beach face down no longer has the impact that it should have. But we must never forget that some of these children, they are suffering every minute of every day. Their plight must never be forgotten. That's it for this edition of The Point here on CGTN. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handpoint with Alex. Download the CGTN Live application to watch our show on your mobile devices. For previous shows, go to the CGTN channel of the YouTube. Click on the playlist and look for The Point with Lu Xun. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.